Yes,
Sunday
yes, yes.
is a working day. Monday is a working day. John Chris, you no work on Sunday.
Now I'll tell you something about Monday. Remember Black Uhuru song? One day I don't like is a Monday, because that's the day that slavery begins. Welcome, welcome, welcome to another episode of Sunday Scoops. And in continuation this week, we're continuing with the evolution of dub. As a matter of fact, it's more than the evolution of dub. It's just dub, period, full stop. A whole genre in itself. And for those who are uninitiated and those who don't know, dub in its vernacular means dancing very slowly with a woman. Dictionary meaning, it's a copy of, like dubbing a cassette. Yes.
Overwrite.
And also overdubbing, as they do in the movies. You record the original audio, and then because you want to show it in Spain and France, and you overdub those vocals in their native language. And then there's, according to Sly from Sly and Robbie, dubwise, which means it's just drum and bass.
Strictly drum and bass.
Yes, I am. Yeah. So we're going to look on the impact of dub, the people whom it has, basically influenced, such as Mad Professor, some of the early pioneers of dub, such as Lee Scratch Perry and King Tubby and Bunny Lee and the Mighty Two, that's in Joe Gibbs' studio, and a host of other things. We will look at even foreign acts like No Doubt and UB40 and The Clash and Massive Attack, and all those people were influenced. And we're going to have a part 3 too next week, and we're going to look at how dub also influenced hip-hop. But for this week, we're going a little bit more in-depth into the thing, right, Richie?
Yeah, I think even before we get into the guts of the thing, dub as music is kind of looked down and frowned upon, if you will, but, by the especially people who are not necessarily in the music fraternity, because the general tendency is to identify that with some of the dancehall tendency. But the important thing is, if you're looking at Jamaican music in its totality, you cannot do that without taking into consideration the significance of dub, because dub is essentially, Jamaican dub music ultimately became the foundation upon which the music, especially the music after the 1970s, the turn of the 1970s began. And in fact, what dub represented is, from a Jamaican standpoint, is the smaditization, if you will, of the engineer as an artist.
Yeah, man. Typically, mixing board as an instrument.
Typically, the engineer was just seen as somebody behind the console who, twiddle the knobs and punch the buttons and so on.
Yes, I make sure everybody balance out and set up the recording for mastering and all of that. And sometimes the engineer is also your master, but sometimes you have to go to somebody who's like an advanced engineer to master your record. And the mixing down.
Right. Yeah, but what dub did or represents for Jamaican music is that personification of the engineer and his importance as a contributor to the development of Jamaican music. And we want to spend certainly this hour here to look at that as well, and the importance of certain figures. And then there are some artists whose productions, most artists' work, you can do dub variations, but there are some artists who's, based on their own voice intonations, the way they wrote the music, it was literally designed for the dub genre. But I think what you want to do is run a quick taste, give people a little indication.
Yeah, we're going to kick off. 1977 was a year with a man with a melodica called Augustus Pablo, and one of the most influential dub pieces, East of the River Nile.
Wow, yeah, right.
That was Augustus Pablo. First we heard East of the River Nile, and now this is Up Full Living.
Hopeful Living was a tune that was, I think, again, it shows, excuse me, Pablo's co- collaboration between King Tubby's and Scratch Perry, because Hopeful Living was actually worked on and produced by Scratch Perry. But Eastern River Nile is one of the most important dub album coming out of Jamaica, and it was a sort of a seminal work by Tubby's. And you know, for persons who may not have viewed the last week's episode when we started the series, Tubby's is a man who you said was an electrical engineer,
Right.
not necessarily involved in music per se, but got himself into twiddling with the electrical appliances, particularly in the music business, where he started making amplifiers for sound system operators.
And his brother used to do the same thing.
Right. And then he himself built his own sound system, King Tubby's Hi-Fi. And, you know, if you know about the Jamaican music, the relationship that he built with Uri further on down the road. But in that early days, he was working a lot with Bonnie Lee, producer Bonnie Lee, who, again, another seminal figure in this dub era. Augustus Pablo came into the music again almost by accident, in as much as same way as our dub was discovered, because he was at a studio session with Errol Thompson, just looking in, and they had developed this music, Java, what became Java, and according to Errol Thompson, they had laid a rhythm track for, can't remember the name of the singer, who they had set it up for him to do a vocal on the rhythm. And after about a dozen takes, them realized the boy can't sing. No matter what them do with the thing, it can't make him into a singer. And Errol Thompson, out of frustration, decided to say, you know something, just rub out him thing off of the rhythm, and we're going to try and find something to do with it. And Pablo sit down in the studio, listen to them, and decided that, listen, why don't I try something with this thing? And they taped a copy of the record and of the recording, the instrumental recording, and handed it to him. And he went home, took up his melodica, and he started to blow over this rhythm. And I finally settled down on a tune that became Java. He went back to the studio about 2 weeks after, and Errol Thompson listened to what he was doing, and they did 2 recording takes. And according to Errol Thompson, he said the rhythm, what Pablo created, was so unique. I remember that by this time he was a schoolboy. He used to go to Casey. And he said they decided to record the two tracks, and they then used that to do their own artistry. And out of that, Java was born, and out of that, the career of Augustus Pablo as this melodica player extraordinaire came into being. Tubby's love it, because Tubby's at the time is experimenting with pulling apart the tracks, focusing on particular instrument, and he found it easy to do with the work that Augustus Pablo had laid down. In as much as same way as he found it easy to do with other vocalists whose voices he liked,
such as Horace Andy.
Right, people like Horace Andy and so on and things. So that's what brought Tubby's into prominence. In fact, Tubby's is probably the most significant Jamaican in respect of this whole the genre of dub. Your thoughts, Ken?
Basically, I agree with you with King Tubby's, but the man who took it to the planet and is most revered for dub is Lee Scratch Perry. But let's give the listeners, though, Richie, a taste of Java. We have to give you an extended listen on that Java. Trust me. Wicked tune, Richie.
Listen, I remember as a youth when the young boy when this tune came out, and you know, it's just amazing, because we would have been in our early teens, yeah, early 14, 15. Um, Pablo would have left school by that time, but you know, a feature of the period is that a lot of these musicians were youngsters. They were in their 16, 17 year olds. Just have a knack for the music. Augustus Pablo, his brother owned this record shop called Rockers International. In fact, Rockers International was responsible for the production and distribution of a lot of Pablo's work in those days. And but what was significant is that most of these youngsters, they were learning to play music by ear. Mm-hmm. They were not trained musicians and so on. And the environment that the music was developing in basically suited them. For example, you know, we're talking about the 1970s, you never had this proliferation of producers as we now have. So apart from the big three, which would have been...
Well, by the 70s, you had a little bit more.
Yeah, that's what I'm saying. Apart from the big three, you would have now had people like a Bonnie Lee, Scratch Perry, Aquarius Records,
Channel One,
yeah,
Joe Gibbs.
You know, so
what the guy, not Randy's, the other guy up by the stadium there, Harry J. Yeah, Harry J. came in right 1970s. So, but it wasn't the proliferation that you saw, you know, leading into the 90s and the 2000s. It's still a controlled group, and what that did is that it ensured that only the best music was getting out onto the street. It also showed the value. Remember, you know, instrumental music, people look at you frown on this thing, but this is where these producers came alive, because it allowed them this latitude to do what they want. And one of the best person for that was Lee Scratch Perry. Scratch Perry was an enigma. Couldn't read a lick of music, but he knew what he liked. And he knew when to identify it. When he heard it, he knew he could identify it. And as you said, he knew what would work. And so, for him, when we talk about the engineer as an artist and the use of his mixing board as a palette knife, a palette and a paintbrush, this was the man. Creating soundscapes.
You know, he create, what you call it, soundscape. Right, there you go. And you know, you are right. Scratch is actually the master, while Tubby's, you know, did more of the work in terms of using electronics.
Yeah, and you hear Tubby's work in the street.
In the street, but in the studio, right? The man who was the king of the hill was Scratch Perry. And I think we should give the listeners a couple of tastes.
Yeah, man. One of the albums that has been heralded as his greatest album before, you know, the evolution of Lee Scratch into even being called a mad scientist or, you know, whatever it is, was an album called Super 8. So I'm going to give you a couple of cuts from Super 8. So you heard Double Long, 3-in-1, and the last one, Black Vest, which is the dub from Max Romeo's War in a Babylon, again produced by Scratch Perry.
One of the things that, again, dub did or represented for the music producer to a larger extent, not so much the artist now, but the music producer, is that in those days, you know, rental of studio time and paying a band to play on a record, it was an expensive proposition. And so the studios were inclined to try to get as much out of their investment in terms of the rental of the studio time. And the producer wanted to get as much out of the band because I'm going to pay the band for this thing. Dub gave them this opportunity to expand on that work, because once the band laid on the track for the song, that now belongs to the producer, eh?
Right.
and that what the producer could do in concert with the engineer. So in the absence of the band after that, the producer now can sit down with the engineer, and the engineer now takes out all of his mastery, if you will, his all of his fine print point brushes and his broad nose brush, whatever it is, and he's gonna paint several canvases. Yeah, so they could do several things. They could accentuate just drum and bass. So here's a track is laid with all the instrumentation, and the engineer can decide that, okay, we're gonna lead into the song and then we're gonna drop everything except for the drum and bass, and that is a tune by itself. Right. Then you can take the same song, you know, just straight drum and bass, throw in some reverb, and if necessary you can also bring in a DJ. That's a whole different song. Yeah. You can focus on the rhythm track. You can then overdub some other instrumentation on top of it. Right. And you get another track. So from one song, this producer now walks away with maybe 10 different records, right? Yeah. And
not all of them will be a hit, you know. True. At least it's something like, take for instance, Richie, talking about that, Love of a Woman, done by Horace Andy in 1972. The producers, I don't really know the details behind it, but I know that in 1975, they called back Horace Andy into the studio with King Tubby, and they redid it using his vocals. But because between 1972 and 1975, a 3 year span, right. Instrumentation change, technology changes, right. And so you have better instruments, better recording devices.
And the studio, the engineer, have a whole new bag of tricks.
We're on a break right now. When I come back from the break, we're going to come back with Love of a Woman and Dub of a Woman, so that you can hear what we're talking about. And there you have it. Dub of a Woman, 1975. Before that, you heard Love of a Woman, 1972. Much faster, but sound like they use the same vocals and just change the pitch a little bit, Richard.
Again, this was an artist that the engineers particularly loved working with. Horace Andy had that sort of a sleepiness about him. In fact, they call him Sleepy in the business. In terms of how his voice had that way that it just basically wrap around everything when doing. And the studio engineers particularly loved that. What you saw there was, who did that? Would have produced that? That would have been a Tubby's production, yes. Though, where the emphasis is on the drum and the bass and the vocal. That's it, right? Now, something else to keep in mind is the importance of the sound system as far as dub is concerned. Again, we have spent a lot of time over the last 10 years in Jamaica to try, in my opinion, it's almost as if it's a concerted attempt at killing the sound system. The sound system is an integral part of how Jamaican music was built
and consumed,
right? And how the music was consumed.
Because not everything can be played on the radio.
Absolutely. Most of these songs, I'm pretty sure the listeners who are joining us, if you're not into the music, you would have never heard these songs.
Unless, of course, you're talking about like a Sly and Robbie,
right?
That, taxi, unmetered taxi dub, rhythm, or waterbed rhythm, and those rhythm that became kind of mainstream thanks to people like Barry G and those guys who played those music.
You see the term you're using again, rhythm.
Yes.
Rhythm is dub, right? When we talk about a lot of artists know them out there and them running off the mouth and thing. The rhythm that you talk about here, have a tune pan a rhythm, yeah? That's a dub. That is what dub is what produced the concept of rhythm. And what it did is that it extended the reach of the music.
And a typical early example of that would be some of the Jogi production between Prince Mohammed and Dennis Brown, or in keeping with the King Tubby that we're talking about now, we're talking about a song that Cornell Campbell did, Dancing at Greenwich Farm, with Dr. Ali Montano and King Tubby. So let's give the listeners a touch of that song. And that's also a song, again, that you never heard on the radio. You could only hear it on jukebox or in the dance hall. And there you have it, with the sound of the flying cymbal. Credited again to the drummers and in the studio at the time, Bunny Lee and the flying cymbal.
You know what is it again interesting? Bunny Lee, unlike Scratch Perry and the other producers who owned the studios, Bunny Lee was a quintessential smart. He knew what he wanted and he recognized that him could collaborate. I think this tune would have been done between himself, Tubbies, in conjunction with Scratch, because if I'm not mistaken, it was the Hippie Boys who played on this tune, or the because when he used them, he called them the aggravators, right?
Or the upsetters.
Or the upsetters.
When it was at Scratch Perry.
Right.
When they were at Scratch Perry,
them call them the upsetters.
Or when they're with King Tubby, they're the aggravators.
The aggravators. But it was a band that was known as the Hippie Boys. And if the Barrett Brothers were part of this band, so you get that heavy rolling bass, which is typical family man. Alimentado, not often spoken of, by the aficionados, but this was Dr. Alimentado working out on this rhythm with Cornel Campbell and Connor's inimitable vocals. But again, a tune that started out very, very simple, and the producer, by extending the rhythm, right? Turn this tune into a massive dancehall hit, right? In fact, if I'm not mistaken, you have another version that's going to call Beardman Shuffle or something like that, Beardman Skank, but which is on the same Gargan. The rhythm is called the Gargan, and it actually, the tune was the Gargan in this, I'm the Gargan in this dance, right? And again, that extension. So it just illustrates the importance of the concept of dub and its impact on the music, because so many pieces of music were created in this time. Music that never ever got airplay, probably outside of people like a Barry G or the Dread at the Control.
Yeah, Michael Dread. Or even Errol Thompson.
Errol Thompson.
On the radio.
And these guys would play those tunes late in the night. Because they were late night DJs. I think Errol Thompson.
The person who had prime time was
Barry G.
Was in the afternoon and on a Saturday.
Right.
But two other people who, again, influenced dub too, Richie, was Sly and Robbie. And they backed one of the most prolific groups of the 80s, a group called Black Uhuru, right? And one of the songs I'm going to play, and I'm going to try and mix in the dub section, would be Shine Your Eye Gal, 1980 something, 1981.
It's 81.
Yeah. Yeah, that was a wicked album too. I've had some other songs like Rock and Groove and trust me.
The album was a classic. Bunny Wailer is kind of sometimes, I guess because as a whaler and the factor of the popularity of Marley, not enough attention is paid to Bunny. But, this particular album, Black Heart Man, was a classic.
Yes, that was a classic.
This album too, but then Rock and Groove.
You have Rock and Groove and Rootsman Skanking. Some of the songs are interchanged between both albums.
Right.
Yeah.
But again, the concept of the dub and are going beyond that, dub wise, which is where the musicians, once the vocalists step away, the musicians now take over. And in particular, people, the bass player like a Robbie Shakespeare, or a drummer like Sly.
Yeah, or the Barrett Brothers.
Right.
But you're talking about, again, back to Lee Scratch Perry and the Upsetters, right? And then you have Tommy McCook with the Upsetters. And they did a version called Cloak and Dagger or Sharp Razor. And they call it a dub triptych. Anybody who know anything about art knows that triptych means that there's three different pieces, but when you put them together, you can get one whole piece. So I'm going to give you a taste of the Cloak and Dagger with the Upsetters, and then we're going to bring in Dillinger on the song called Dub Organizer. So let me tell you about this song here. Richard, Dub Organizer. No, I love dub, brethren, and I wish I could play dub every day. I wish there was more core listeners in South Florida that really appreciate it.
Yeah, but we can develop. Our job for development.
Yeah, we can do that.
Yeah.
But on this particular track, you heard the Upsetters featuring Tommy McCook on the Cloak and Dagger Sharp Razor rhythm, or dub. And then you have Dillinger now, who did what you would call a special for King Tubby's Hi-Fi. Tubby's is a dub organizer. So there's a difference. Dub plate is used interchangeably with a special, and a special is basically when an artist have a very popular song and a man want that song for his sound system to use in a sound clash. And interestingly, there were sound clashes long before you had an official sound clash. So people like Mighty Crown and all the big systems that go to World Clash, thank God for Duke Creed and Coxsone and Matador and them guys who used to compete
Tom the Great
back
Sebastian.
in the day. Yes, because what you're reaping the benefit of today is happenstance, but it was enterprise and and them just do a thing back in the day. And again, we take what we do for granted with those things. So it's just something that we do, and we no longer put any kind of big importance on it. And then somebody comes in, sees the value, takes it, makes some money, and then we say, boy, the money in my teeth. But that's not the case.
A big part of our problem with that, Garth, is that the music industry in Jamaica is largely seen as and operates as a cottage industry. It has been like that from inception. Go back to the 50s, and it's the same thing. You make the point about sound clash from the day when Coxsone and Duke Creed sit down on them throne and the man them carry me on them shoulder in the 1950s. I play for Trojan sound. Then there sound clash, and every sound wanted to have a tune that is exclusive to them. And so, the being able to exploit in the modern era a popular song and create a variation of that popular song that is exclusive to that sound system, it meant a fairly reasonable payday for a number of people. For the sound on the one hand, because it increased in popularity, for the artist who originally voiced the music, especially if the artist is participating in the production of the special. Right? And even today, artists make a substantial amount of money from doing these dub plates, or what we call special. And you wanted to define that the dub plate thing is coming from the early days of using soft wax.
Right, or acetate.
And
people like a Matador used to get his acetate and stampers, which is used to make them. He used to get them done in Miami by a company called Buster Records downtown in Miami. Have nothing to do with Bustamante, even though the guys from Central America called, or Prince Buster for that matter. And talking about Prince Buster, there was an influential song that Prince Buster did that influenced people like Mad Professor, who also did some work with Lee Scratch Perry out of England. He's actually from Guyana.
Mad Professor.
That man loved the music.
According to him, he was in the music from about 10 years old. He started experimenting with electronics. In fact, it was his love of electronics, he said, that pulled him into this music. And coming out of Guyana, he migrated to England as a teenager, about 14 or 15 years old. And he created his own mixing board. And he said, with the music that allowed him the greatest latitude in terms of just its design and the structure of the music was the music coming out of Jamaica.
And you're talking about in the 70s. But one of his early influences, real quick before we wrap up for the evening, is a song called The Message by Prince Buster.
Hi there. If you enjoyed that clip, go on over to our website at yardmedia.com, where you can watch the entire broadcast at your leisure. And while you're there, why don't you check out our other reggae music features? And before you leave, pick up some of our Jamaican reggae merchandise, and hey, don't forget to tell your friends.